So I disagree there, because if John Leibowitz, the chairman of the FTC, hadn't mentioned that the concept of do not track in a speech before the Senate last July, we wouldn't have this technology in 3 of the browsers. The browsers responded directly to pressure from Washington. And in fact, Tim Wu has a really interesting paper that he just released a few weeks ago on agency threats. So regulatory threats, not regulatory regulation. And I think it's, it's fascinating, the power of a single speech. And I think we have to thank the FTC for where we are today. I think it would be great if they had the power to enforce this, but I think we actually have to give them a shout out for pushing the browser vendors who dragged their feet for years on these issues. And of course, the reason the browser vendors drag their feet is because many of them are ad networks themselves or funded directly by ad networks. So
that's not inconsistent with Ryan's point, which is that might be a distortion in the market where we should be.
Right, it is. It's a distortion in the force, but it's a positive one.
All right, the distortion you want. That's
but listen, I mean, I don't support that sort of regulatory bullying or intimidation, but one can at least make a nuanced argument to say that hanging the sword of Damocles might, in some situations, do good, but you don't actually want a regulatory or legislative mandate. There is a tenable middle ground that I can respect, and I think that's one that really would take cognizance of the dangers in having the government get involved in dictating design and recognize that instead this is much better left to the standard-setting process that has made the internet work thus far.
But the FTC only has 1.5 technologists. They're never going to design the standard.
Yeah, but I'm not arguing against a straw man. There is legislation pending that would actually have the FTC get involved in how this works, and the Europeans certainly want to do the same. I'm not inventing this fantasy.
I would like to get questions from the audience now. Oh, we have some.
Step up
to the microphones.
And one thing, I think this is a wonderful panel. I've so enjoyed it. There's one thing I'd like to add for the non-tech crowd. We hear this stuff all the time, and we know what you mean when you say HTTP or header and all that. If you have your computer on and you're watching streaming and you have no clue what they're talking about, click View. Go down to Page Source, click Page Source. It's going to open up a window. That stuff you're looking at is HTTP. If you look 3 lines down, there's a caret, a sideways pyramid that has head in it. And it has a caret afterwards. And you look all the way down, it has a matching thing that says caret/head. That's the header.
Very helpful, Lily. Technical explanation.
That's actually not the header, but we can talk more. That's the head section in the HTTP spec of a web page.
HTML spec.
In the HTML spec. Sorry, it's tough using existing tools for consumers to see the communication stream between the browser and servers, which is one of the reasons that consumers don't know how many companies are tracking them. There's no way to figure out easily how many different companies are tracking you on page.
It's why we so appreciate the work of nerds.
There are good tools.
In Internet Explorer, you can click Tools, Safety, and then View Web Page Privacy Policy, and that'll give you a pretty good list of all the third-party content.
There's a reasonably good browser plugin called Ghostery that if you install will actually at least make a little bit more transparent to the user what third-party connections are being made every time you load a website.
Cool tools. Identify yourself if you want to. I'm a privacy and identity privacy guy, so you don't have to identify yourself to speak in my panel.
Jay Stanley with the ACLU, and I'm just disappointed that my startup hasn't been successful because the startup I wanted to plan because users just haven't been given enough opportunity for trade-offs. I was going to put up a startup where you create transcripts of everybody's phone calls and use that to market to them. And not only do users not able to make trade-offs there, but in fact the government has taken away our opportunity to make trade-offs by making that illegal, and probably cut out entire economic marketplaces that could be flourishing and making our phone calls more expensive. And in fact,
free phone calling.
My point is, obviously, there's no reason that anybody really wants to be tracked on the internet as they move around the internet. That is a social decision that we. Let me finish my question. Let me finish my question, please. So that is a social decision that we as a society made, which is that. Let me finish my question. Wait, my point. Okay. And my point is that that's a social decision we've made, and we can make a similar decision with regards to the internet, that nobody really wants to be tracked as they go around the internet. There is no question that the private sector, if we unleash it, will become better and better, that the capitalism will become incredibly good at spying on citizens and on consumers. It will be moved to a very refined level. We don't want citizens to have to get into an arms race with companies. And so isn't it true that we should... true that we should impose our basic values on internet tracking just as we have with phone call tapping.
Okay, so what are those? So what are those basic values and whose are they? Because we've been down this road before. I mean, this was in large part the debate over Gmail, where our friends at Epic thought it was basically unconscionable that I should be able to use an internet service that algorithmically scans the contents of my email to deliver advertising to fund an internet email service that was unprecedented in its quality and its innovation. Okay? They wanted to say, let's use our basic values to stop that. And hundreds of millions of people disagreed, right? And are using that service and love it. So the argument that you're starting from, this whole, like, well, we can't have any sort of tracking or any sort of analysis of content, I think is fundamentally misplaced. Because there are real trade-offs here. There are many values, and your values are not the only ones.
We're not going to have a back and forth argument because we've got a lot of questions. Sir?
A couple of, John Warnerwick from Toronto. First off, I think the entire economic and market discussion is misplaced because the real market is not between the consumer and the website, because there's no exchange of money. The real market is between the website and the ad companies, and that market's working perfectly fine, thank you very much. This is like a debate about how pretty do you want the shearing chute as the pigs go, because we're not consumers, we're the product. So I think the economic point misses there. Also, when you assert that there must be real harm, there are those that think that privacy is a right and that risk-based harm decisions are an inappropriate metric. But the question I want to ask is, if we apply, and please take my question as is, don't recast as what I really mean is, what happens when you take this consumer choice empowered, the companies do all of that, and instead of applying it in commercial transactions in the United States or Canada, you apply this same free for unregulated, and the website can do whatever they want, if that's a fair interpretation, in authoritarian regimes where the use of the internet serves real purposes for democracy and has real risks for people that are using it. And if they want not to be tracked, that's a life or death decision. And I think this approach doesn't work in those circumstances.
That's a big question. It's a lot of question, but somebody down there's got to have a couple of answers.
I think you hit on the greatest threat to privacy, which is that the state will acquire information that we've shared. The problem with, for instance, having our phone calls transcribed and being used to market to us isn't that that's inherently a harmful thing. It's that that information could be misused. That's the risk. When government is using that to spy on us or to prosecute us for doing things that shouldn't be illegal in the first place, that's a real problem. And in the case of authoritarian regimes, that problem is all the more magnified. That's why we need to focus on limiting government access to information to allow companies that want to be good stewards of data to do so. Today they can't do that, as Senator Leahy will say.
And I'm proud to say that both Ryan's organization, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, my organization, TechFreedom, and a number of other free market and libertarian organizations have joined with groups in the center and the left to advocate for reforming exactly those laws. So we put our money where our mouth is. We're serious about building a higher wall between government and privately stored data, because it is a real threat. But just to your other point, I would say, when I argue, and when Ryan talks about harms, I don't mean harm in narrow economic term. I would really encourage you to read Howard Beale's excellent paper. Howard ran the Bureau of Consumer Protection in the early 2000s. Who paid for that paper? He wrote a wonderful paper explaining that the concept of harm, as it was originally developed in the FTC, was not limited, for example, to monetary damages, but rather was intended to refer to many of the kinds of situations we've talked about here today, and that the FTC, in a somewhat perverse way, is actually sort of narrowly construed that concept to say that it's limited by that sense, that definition of harm, and therefore it needs new authority. So instead, I would say actually that the FTC has a robust way of going after real harms, even when they're not economic.
Next question, sir.
I'm Babu Cook from Indiana University. One thing I'd like to point out is when I thought there was going to be a debate, I thought it was going to be between how lame and weak the current do not track effort is and whether we need a stronger one. I never thought it would be between whether we don't.
We apologize.
And on the other hand, I would like to point out, I come from a psychological background, and so one of the problems is that it's an opt-in. And if you look at the psychological literature, as long as it's opt-in, most users are actually not going to actually use it. Most users are not going to care about it. And in which case, I really think it should be it should be an opt-out, because if the idea is if it adds value to the consumer, right? That's the idea, that advertising and tracking adds value to the consumer. It creates differentiated products that are more marketable and they're more targeted. Then the consumer themselves would rationally, if you're using the rational argument, they would themselves then opt in, and they would decide that they would be tracked. As for the economic argument that has been made, that it's not...
Why is everyone trying to do 2 questions? Go ahead, but this is the last time I'm going to accept 2 questions.
Okay, well, I'm not going to talk about that. Then I'm going to talk about the primary thing that everyone's been talking about, that it reduces choices. I'm appalled that the left did not make this point. Tracking actually does not increase choices, and this is where the technologists should read sociology literature. Tracking actually decreases choices in many instances. For example, I'll give you the example of with Google advertising, if you're a person who's left-leaning and liberal, you're only going to see when you do a Google search, you're only going to see results that are left-leaning.
We get it.
Right. All right. So that was my point. So choice is not always increasing.
I want to hear from Chris on this set of
Right. So I think it's interesting to note that there is a question as to whether this should be opt-in or opt-out. And I think my friends on the right here, not only do they want this to be opt-in, but they also want you to crawl through broken glass before you can enable the option.
Asbestos. And asbestos. They really are. Let's hear one question from you, sir.
Pedro Leon from Carnegie Mellon University. I want to ask about enforcement from the FTC perspective, because I think regulations are very expensive and nobody wants them. But self-regulation is clearly not working. So why is that the case that the FTC is not able to punish those companies who are not behaving correctly? Is it a problem of budget? Is it a problem of authority? Why is that?
Well, let me talk generally about enforcement policy. First of all, the FTC does not have a general mandate to punish badness, much as we would like to have it, I suppose. There are specific statutes that give the FTC authority, and enforcement actions have to fit within the confines of those statutes and the case law. That's number one. Number two is the question of resources, and I'm glad to hear that everyone here seems to agree that at least in matters of consumer protection, the FTC would benefit from more resources, because in fact decisions do get made that we would love to enforce in situation X, but we just don't have the resources. And those are the 2 things really that primarily limit the ability to enforce in practice.
See, I've just been holding my tongue because I'm in a moderator's role. That's your budget, man. But go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so I'd actually like to make the case that do not track is good for business. And so there was a recent FTC enforcement case against a company called Chitika. Chitika is an online behavioral advertising network. They offered an opt-out cookie on their website, and the cookie expired after 10 days. The FTC, I think, rightfully said that if you're going to offer an opt-out cookie to consumers, it should be effective.